What's up? Hello, everyone. It's EJ and Luna.
Hi. Hi, Dan.
We are here. Luna never finished my nose. You never put makeup on my nose.
I couldn't because it was still bleeding before, and you should not put makeup on when it's still actively bleeding.
This is your revenge for me sneeze starting you on your last Mooncast, isn't
Yes.
it? Can you tell how large the injury on my nose is? My nose has been wounded.
Wounded.
I have a news one. You never found the patch thing?
No, I never found it.
Failure all around.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. How is everybody doing? I saw some interesting chats in the chat while we were waiting.
Right? Yeah.
For instance, Chef Wholesome. Love that username. Said,
very wholesome.
Hi, Luna. I wrote an essay about proletarian piety and cited the book. Thank you so much for teaching the concept. All right. I can't say this with 100% certainty, but Chef Wholesome, you may have the distinction and honor of being the first person to academically cite the book.
Oh.
In English, at least.
In English.
In Vietnam, I imagine it gets cited quite often.
But in English.
So that's really cool. If anybody else does that, let us know. And honestly, we'd like to see the essay too.
Yeah, I would love to.
If you don't mind emailing us a copy, we just want to, see how it's being used and see what y'all think and etc. So I'll throw up our email address just in case anybody has done it or wants to do it or anything. It's just a little non-compete co-op at gmail.com. If you don't understand the .com part of it, then you need to go take a computer class. Luna loves the green.
I love it.
I don't get it.
I am green person. Inside of me.
Easy being green.
Inside of me, I'm green.
Having to wake up on the wrong side of the bed. You do that every day.
Ooh.
Luna doesn't like waking up.
Nobody likes waking up. Do you like waking up?
There are absolutely morning people.
100%.
We had other nice.
The essay is pinned on my Twitter. Okay, so send us your Twitter.
Oh, maybe if we just look up Chef Wholesome.
Yeah, right.
Wait, there was another one though that was nice. Where did it go? It was a nice one. Nice person said nice thing. Can't remember.
Yeah, today is for nice people say nice things.
Matthew said proletarian piety is one of my favorite new concepts and one the American left is sorely lacking.
Yes.
I feel like somebody else said something nice about proletarian piety too, but I can't find the comment now. I thought I started, but I can't. Luna gets so mad all the time. Luna, don't get so mad all the time. It's bad for your blood pressure.
No. Stop being anxious.
Stop telling me what to do. All right. I've situated my windows.
Finally.
I'm thirsty.
I'll be in going school.
Luna, when I get thirsty, you gotta talk.
Oh, try this one. People, this is how we actually Vietnamese people usually eat mango jam. We mix it with yogurt.
Luna has remember everyone, Luna has the problem of only telling the middle parts of stories.
True.
So I'll tell the full story.
Yep.
We have way too many mangoes.
Yay.
Which sounds like the beginning of a local grocery store commercial.
Right?
We have so many mangoes, we're practically giving them away. We are literally giving them away. We're like trying to find people to give mangoes to.
Yeah.
Because Luna's parents had a bumper mango tree boon. And now there's a bunch of mangoes and we have mangoes and everyone in Luna's village has mangoes. Anyway, also when Luna's talking about yogurt, she's talking about something that might be difficult to find in the USA, at least where I'm from, which is fermented milk yogurt. It's like a drink. But I always wondered, could you just make that by taking regular yogurt and just mixing it with
Yes. So here you do
water or milk or something?
No, you use condensed milk, some fresh milk, no sugar, unsweetened fresh milk, and condensed milk mixed together with one, small, what do you call it? Yogurt, and then leave it there overnight. Keep it warm like that, about 40 degrees Celsius. There you go. Next morning, that is yogurt drink.
That's right, I guess.
I got the essay here.
The non-compete Twitch chat has fallen into such obscurity. We only have one person watching non-compete Twitch.
Oh, I want to know who's that. So is this yourself?
No, it's read and rap.
Oh,
holding down the Twitch.
Read and rap.
Only chatter.
Right there, you're not alone.
So read and rap.
It seems like you're alone, but you're not alone. We have us.
There's kind of not a lot of people watching right now. I'm feeling like, is there something going on tonight?
Yeah, something.
Is there a sports game or something? Get in the chat, folks. Where is everybody? Come on, let's go.
Oh
Anyway.
shoot, Maddie, you cannot drink milk. Totally understandable. A lot of Vietnamese.
Lacoste intolerant. Is it Lacoste like a brand?
Lacoste.
That's like the alligator, right?
Yeah, right. You're Lacoste intolerant. Understand that.
I've been Lacoste intolerant since about 1997, I guess. Man, I used to have so many Lacoste shirts. Is that the one with the alligator? Yeah,
yes.
It is. I forgot about that. My mom used to go, and we were a thrift store family. So she would go to the thrift store or Goodwill or whatever, and anytime she found a Lacoste shirt, she would get one for me. So I had like so many Lacoste shirts. We
call it Lacoste in Vietnamese, or just we call it as crocodile shirt.
Polo shirt with a little alligator on it, and I was a styling little 8-year-old.
Áo Lacoste or áo cá sấu.
Yeah, she would. I'm trying to think of other brands that she always got. Bugle Boy was a big one in the 90s. If she saw anything by Bugle Boy, she'd grab that. I don't know. Lots of different brands that aren't really that big anymore.
So good.
Mango yogurt, everybody. Mango yogurt.
Mango yogurt and ice.
Mango yogurt.
Mango yogurt and ice.
And ice. Iced mango yogurt. So Tarso says, I make yogurt with yogurt and slightly boiled milk, but let the milk cool off a bit.
Yeah, I know. It's about 40 degrees Celsius. It's the perfect temperature for the bacteria to rise in the milk.
It's Father's Day. People with their families. Yes. Well, happy Father's Day to any fathers out there.
Father's Day.
Parents. We need just like a Parents' Day. Just have one Parents' Day.
No.
Maybe? I don't know. You'll tell me. What do you have? You don't have Father's and Mother's Day in Vietnam, really, do you? Okay. Just curious. Well, how's everybody doing? We are going to talk about fascism today, and it's not going to be too intense. It's stuff that you need to know, honestly.
Yeah.
I don't really think a content warning is necessary for this one, but we are going to be talking about the origins of fascism, Mussolini and George Sorel's ideas, which Mussolini used to create fascism, and we're going to talk about how the origins of fascism are still extremely relevant today because fascism keeps getting reinvented again and again and again throughout history. And there is a clear pattern as to how it works. There's a clear pattern as to how liberals tend to side with fascists for a very specific reason, which is that fascism is very often, I don't know if I would say almost always, but historically, it's very, very clear pattern of it being a corruption of established leftist movements and leftist ideas. So we are going to talk about all that, read a few things, and talk about the history of it. We're working on this documentary right now. In fact, let's go ahead and let's show the trailer for the documentary. For folks who haven't seen it. We've been working on it, or we're still working on it. I really hope we can get it done in time this week.
Better.
But it's a lot of editing and research, actually, because we're annotating this documentary, so there's going to be a lot of information densely packed into it. It's coming from the source text for it is Perini Functions of Fascism, and it talks quite a lot about the same stuff we're talking about today. But really, it's about how fascism serves capital. And I just finally got this stuff together. All right, so let's watch the trailer. Here we go.
Most people are never exposed to real history. In school, we usually don't read history, we read history textbooks, and mainstream ones at that, which avoid underlying realities, and ones that propagate myths that serve the powers that be. myths that some of us find harmful to the truth and to democracy. So this is real history. This particular segment is entitled The Functions of Fascism. Fascism is a name that was given to the political movement that arose in Italy under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, who ruled that country from 1922 to 1943. Nazism, a similar movement led by Adolf Hitler, Germany's dictator from 1933 to 45. The big landowners and industrialists used their fascist goon squads, gave them money and gave them arms, and used them as kind of strike breakers, anti-labor militias. They styled themselves the United Front against Bolshevism. In 1922, the big capital interests in Italy decided to go for the whole thing. Representatives of the Federation of Industry and the Federation of Agriculture, which was a agribusiness firm, and representatives of the National Banking Association, they all met together and they met with Mussolini and they planned the fascist march on Rome. Mussolini sat there and planned that with the leading capitalists of Italy. By the way, this is almost never mentioned in the accounts about the March on Rome. These big capitalists contributed 20 million lira toward that undertaking. In the words of Senator Ettore Conti, himself a very loyal representative of the moneyed interests, quote, Mussolini was the candidate of the plutocracy, that is of the wealthy, and the business associations. A very similar pattern, by the way, of coordination and compliance existed in Germany also, less than a decade later.
So there you go. That's trailer for the documentary that's hopefully going to drop sometime this week at youtube.com/noncompete. It will also be premiering on means.tv.
Yeah. In order to have that quality of the trailer you just watched, it was months of editing of both of us.
Well, we didn't just edit the trailer. It's going to be about.
I mean, the
gonna be
whole
over half an
documentary. I mean, talking about the quality.
Yeah, it's a
the whole video.
full on documentary. I think it'll be really good.
Yeah.
And our comrade Noam, who is who's been working with us a lot, who lives in Vietnam but currently traveling in the USA, helped us edit it and also did the a lot of the editing on. Was it your last video? Wait, was it my last video? What was the video that Noam did? The awesome. Man, I'm so like my brain is so
mine
confused.
Both, mine too. You know,
it was
the Declaration of Independence.
Is that the one where Noam did the little music video at the end? Yeah. Okay, yeah. Luna's Declaration of Independence video. Yeah, Noam helped us edit that and also did the little Declaration of Independence thing at the end. So we are excited to be expanding our little team here. So anyway, that's coming out soon. Now let's talk about, I guess we'll just jump into this because we don't really have a lot else prepared for topics this week. There's a little bit of, is there any Vietnamese news we want to talk about right now? Nothing that wouldn't be like really complicated, right?
Let me think for a second. Just about, the new, bill about LGBTQ plus communities getting. Oh yeah, they're passed. Almost. I don't know. I have very high confidence that they're about to pass a pretty strong bill to support trans folks, especially by LGBTQ plus people. Mm-hmm. It's going to allow people, from what I remember, I'm going off the top of my head. It's going to allow people to. It's going to say I think it gives them the right to reassignment surgery. Gender reassignment surgery or something along those lines. And then which I'm not sure how that works out. I think they're working out what exactly that means, but hopefully it means that the surgery would just be like, provided by insurance, et cetera, like it is in a lot of other countries. Yeah. But also it'll make it easier and like more expedited to change your gender. It'll just basically make. It has the support from the Ministry of Health and also it definitely has the support from the Secretary of the Communist. Yeah, it's pretty good. The General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam supports this bill. National Assembly too. And the Department of Health. So I have a strong feeling that's going to get pushed through probably by middle of next year, I guess. Hopefully sooner. The sooner the better. But that's good news. Mm-hmm. And they just announced a thing that they're going to make solar. They're going to have another push for solar power. Yeah, so that's cool because. They were pushing it really hard in like 2020 and they had a lot of progress really fast. There were issues with
how it couldn't provide energy at night, and they had like too much in the daytime, so they kind of like paused that program, and they were trying to figure out what to do. But I guess they're making another push to try to implement more solar technology. So, some good news coming out of Vietnam. Gio, I forgot your super chat. It said, woo, documentary sneak peek.
Hey.
I hope you enjoyed the sneak peek. I hope it was worth the super
I think it's worth it.
I think it was worth it. I liked it. But thank you so much. Is it true that fascism has socialist origins? I heard the first fascists were syndicalists. That's exactly what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, that's exactly what we talk about.
Now, here's the thing. I think we should talk about this right away.
Wait a minute. I want to answer this quick question first because we did a lot of research about this.
Yeah.
You get a backup battery in Vietnam for your house when the power goes out?
Yes.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, it's a little expensive.
Yes.
It'll pay for. So the way we did a lot of research because actually we're thinking about getting solar for the studio just to make it more reliable and hopefully like save money and maybe make it more green. We're trying to figure out what all that means and
sustainable.
If it even is sustainable and everything. So as far as financially, from what we can tell, it would pay for itself after like 5 years.
5-10 years.
Yeah.
Depends.
Which is not great.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure. I'm still trying to figure out what the impacts are as far as...
And after 5-10 years, you're going to need to change a new battery.
Yeah.
Because it only lasts about that long.
Yeah, but hopefully by then they'll have better battery technology.
And then the most expensive thing in the solar system is the inverter. Number one is inverter. Number two is battery.
Yeah.
The solar panels very cheap.
If we just all use DC instead of AC, wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, wouldn't be a problem.
Except a lot more electricians would be dead. But anyway.
Yep.
Ohio's having an anti-trans bill coming up in Speaking Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is still happening. I mean, it hasn't stopped. Let's put it that way. There's still a huge onslaught of anti-trans bills being shoved down the people's throats across the USA. And these are unpopular bills. These are not supported by the people. These are astroturfed. It's a huge campaign by lobbyists and by corporations to shove this legislation down the necks of the people. So we all really need to understand how this works and how this functions. I have a video on it from probably about almost a year ago, I guess. No, it wasn't that long ago, maybe 8 months ago. But it's one of my more recent videos on my channel, youtube.com/noncompete. I need to follow up with that. In fact, I think I want to do a video with another creator about the massive waves of basically we're having a domestic refugee crisis in the USA because so many trans people are having to move all across the country. And it's just a massive, massive problem. A lot of people are being basically displaced because, something just happened. There was a speaker who was barred from speaking because they were trans, and it was under the auspices of one of those anti-drag bills. So it's already happening. It's already causing people to get basically prevent the state is preventing people from speaking in public because of these transphobic fascist bills, and there is the potential that someone will eventually go to prison for it because it is considered a crime in these horrible, horrible bills. So we've got to keep abreast of these things and make sure that we keep fighting because the people do not want these bills shoved down their throats. They just don't.
Yeah.
Brandon B asking about the Vietnam bill. You said this bill would be passed sometime next year. I wonder who slows Vietnam LGBT bills in Vietnam. For example, the conservative side of the LGBT opposed them in Japan. Who's slowing things up? I'm just going to give you the impression that I get. Okay, I don't know if this is a fact or not. It's the impression that I get is that it really just comes out of bureaucracy. And Vietnam, a lot of stuff they do is very slow. They have a huge energy bill that they just finally passed after something like 6 years of
it's just freaking slow, man.
Yeah, I mean, and it's something I think that is recognized that there's too much bureaucracy and they need to cut this shit out because I've read a few articles in Tap Chi Kung San about that. And I don't know that there's anybody necessarily trying to. There probably are. There probably are people who are conservative and have queerphobic attitudes and that sort of thing, slowing it down. Yeah. But there was one article I read. It's worth pulling this up because there was an interesting quote from the General Secretary of Vietnam who talked about how they're dragging their feet too much. Let me find this. Hold on. Vietnam News. I think if I take them. I found it the other day. I can find it later.
I mean, we're saying our, how do you call it? the social consciousness is very much developed, in favor of LGBTQ plus community. So what the government...
Wait. I found it.
Okay,
I want to
go.
get the exact quote from
Yeah.
the General Secretary, which I thought was really good. So, okay, I'll read this whole article. It's not very long. This is from Vietnam News, and an interesting thing about Vietnam News is that it's one of the more conservative newspapers. They don't even really talk about stuff that's controversial very often. Controversial, just anything that isn't like set in stone in terms of policy and stuff. So the fact they're talking about it at all is one of the reasons why I think that they're pretty likely to push this through. So this one says, this is from April of 2023, and it says, gender identity law might be included in Parliament's 2024 agenda. There are currently no specific legal documents regulating gender identity and gender transition. Lawmaker Nguyen Chi on Monday presented a proposal to a meeting of the National Assembly Standing Committee on Building a Law on Gender Identity. In Vietnam, there are currently no specific legal documents regulating gender identity and gender transition, and no comprehensive and complete studies or surveys on gender identity and transgender people in Vietnam. Therefore, there is currently no accurate picture of the situation. The building of gender identity law would clearly demonstrate the high regard that the Socialist Republic of Vietnam holds for the values of humanity and the spirit of protecting vulnerable communities and leaving no one behind in its policies, Chi said. The scope of the law only focuses on two gender identities, male and female. So, as a non-binary person, I'll say not perfect.
Yeah.
But it's a step forward. But, obviously there's more work to be done, even if this does get passed. Accordingly, the law regulates the rights and obligations of individuals who undergo sex reassignment from female to male or male to female, competent agencies confirming the gender identity of transgender individuals, conditions, documents, and procedures. This is one of the big problems right now for trans people.
Yeah.
Because it's already legal to change your gender on paper, but the policies and procedures are very unclear, and there's not a direct procedure for doing it.
Yeah.
So clarifying and establishing the policy for actually making it happen in the system is going to be clarified and systemized. For individuals who wish to undergo sex reassignment procedures, conditions, documents, and procedures for organizations and individuals performing medical interventions. I am not sure, and I don't think anybody knows yet, if this is only going to allow people who have surgery to transition or not. I don't know. Hopefully not. Hopefully it will allow anybody, even if they haven't undergone reassignment surgery. In my opinion, that would obviously be preferable, because not everybody who's trans wants to have surgery.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know. I think they're working all those details out. 3 policies are clearly stated in the proposed law: the right to change gender identity, the right to have a gender identity that's different from from the gender at birth recognized upon the request of the citizen, and the right to choose a medical intervention method for sex reassignment. So there you go. There's the basic idea of what they want to push through.
Yeah.
She said that just a day before, in a feedback document, the government has stated its position supporting the making of the gender identity law. So the government basically has agreed in principle to the law.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you don't know what the government is, it's not the party, it's the National Assembly and all the people who work in the legislation of the government. And these are the people that actually make the decisions that become law. Okay. Okay. Which would help contribute to the institutionalization of some human rights related content that have been recognized in the 2013 Constitution and 2015 Civil Code. So there's a big lag right now between what in theory you should be able to do and what in practice you are able to do. Yeah. And this would hopefully address that lag. From 2016, the government has assigned the Ministry of Health to research and propose the development of legal documents on sex reassignment. However, this is a difficult issue that requires time and resources, which they say that about everything that takes a long time. They do. I mean, just being honest, with the energy thing, they were like, it's really difficult. It's really complicated. It takes a long time. And it's like,
so start doing it.
Yes, so get the work. I don't know. Anyway, the government has tasked the ministry to provide its research results to facilitate the efforts of National Assembly lawmakers in penning the bill. Presenting the reviews of the proposal, Chairman of the National Assembly Legal Committee, Huang Thanh-Tung, stated that the National Assembly Legal Committee and the Social Committee highly appreciate the efforts and dedication of the National Assembly deputies in preparing the proposal for the law and recognize the necessity of promulgating this law. Most opinions from the Legal Committee concurred to include the gender identity law in the 2024 agenda and table the bill for feedback during the 8th plenary session. He also requested the government's support in coordinating with lawmakers in the building of the law. He pointed out a number of concerns for the government committee, given its sensitive and difficult nature. So there you go. If you want to know one person who's slowing it down, there's one.
Yeah.
asking for more clarity on the political and real-life basis of the building and promulgation of the law in the proposal. The scope of the law has some overlap with the law on gender transition that government is studying, Kuhn noted, asking lawmakers to continue studying the issue to complete the requested document for the building of the law. So there you go. There's a little bureaucracy right there.
Yep.
The General Secretary, Bhuivan Kung, said sensitive or difficult is not a good reason to avoid the issue.
Yep.
I like this strong stance from the General Secretary.
Yeah.
He's saying, like, that's bullshit. Okay, it's difficult. Doesn't mean we don't need to pump the brakes right now.
It's
So he
difficult,
says,
so we need to like.
he says,
harder.
here's the direct quote. Okay. Society, this I think is really important for you to understand. And this is a dialectical opinion, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay. Society is relatively open towards the issue already.
Yeah.
If we don't soon build a legal corridor, there will be issues in both institutional and practical dimensions. In other words, and Luna has made videos about how in popular culture, LGBTQ plus people are already very accepted.
Yes.
And we know just from our experiences
We're
that,
very accepting, you know.
that there's just generally, you know,
Our society.
public acceptance of LGBTQ plus people. It's
And
not perfect. There are definitely queerphobic attitudes.
absolutely, there are absolutely assholes out there. But generally speaking, it's related to historical materialism that like the superstructure and the base. So our superstructure is a bit more developed than the base, where like we like even traditionally we very accepting to LGBT. Also, it is a very important part of our community for thousands of years, and we have a whole religion based on their identity, right?
Yeah.
So very important. And nowadays, you know, like a lot of celebrities, LGBTs, and we like they are loved by people, and it's just like it's just this is how they are, who they are, like. But like the law system of us is not supportive enough, so we demand to change.
So they want to make the actual system, it's lagging behind the people, basically, is what the General Secretary says. Natalie, you caught me. Every time I see NA, I want to say North America. It's my America brain. Chairman of the National Assembly Social Committee, Nguyen Thuy Anh, while appreciating Tree's brave and dedicated initiative given the nature of the law, but urged the authors to deliberate more on the practicality and relevant documents to approve the draft law project. The top legislator, Vuong Dinh Huệ, underlines his respect for the proposal to build a law by lawmaker, but given that there are still differing opinions and there's still time left, Huệ suggested that the reviewing bodies, Deputy Chi and the government prepared additional reports and submit them to the National Assembly Standing Committee at the next meeting. So
Vuong Dinh Huệ is an important guy here. He's the chairman of the National Assembly.
Oh, really? Because I had read that Kung was also the chairman.
There were maybe like a few chairmen, but Vuong Dinh Huệ is the most important guy. He just voted like 2021.
So the General Secretary is trying to push it forward, and the chairman is kind of maybe holding it back. Well, there you go. So I mean, yeah, it's annoying that it hasn't happened yet. I was hoping that Vietnam would be the first country to have gay marriage back in 2013.
Do it. Why
they
didn't
need
they
to
just
pass
do
it. It's like
it's so annoying to me.
But you kind of get an idea from that about what's going on.
Yeah.
So I had another question that I wanted to read, but I cannot find it. Or another comment. Hey, you know what, Omega Hacksaws? A lot of people, I don't know what you're really talking about, actually, but a lot of people have quoted Zizek, including myself, not knowing Zizek's reactionary background until far too recently. So,
I was wrong.
Ha!
Now he became the deputy prime minister. So he got.
So
he was a chairman before. Now he became like the prime minister, deputy prime minister. Got
it. Okay. Turbo Queer, thank you for the super chat. It says, congrats on the new documentary. Did you get Perini to record the original audio? Super exciting and dire.
We did get him.
No, we didn't. Don't start spreading fake news. No, I could kind of show you how much fucking work it was to make the audio sound good. Though.
I mean,
hold on, I'll do that real quick.
If you're a nerd like us, we can show that.
I'll show you the before and after. Hold on.
Oh my god, it was a lot of work. I was the one who did the first audio edit, you know. It was
So here's the original sound that we're drawing from. I'll share the screen. Hold on. archive.org. So if you want to go ahead and listen to like a lot of what is in the documentary, you can go ahead and get a sneak preview, but it's going to be a pretty crappy listening experience, as I will now demonstrate.
This is Michael Perini, and welcome to Real History, a series of talks by me on different historical subjects that are relevant for understanding today's realities. Most people are never exposed to real history. In school, we usually don't read history, we read history textbooks, and mainstream ones at that, which avoid underlying realities, and ones that propagate myths that serve the powers that be. Myths.
Okay, so that's the original. And then this is after we cleaned it up and tried to make it a little bit more, listenable. Hold on. So you can hopefully get an idea we did a lot of traditional editing, and I used some AI tools to clean it up as well, I'll admit. Here we go. This is what
Most people are never exposed to real history. In school, we usually don't read history, we read history textbooks, and mainstream ones at that, which avoid underlying realities.
So you get an idea that we've put a lot into that. Hopefully, I think it sounds pretty awesome now, actually, but it did not come easily. We had to spend a lot of time with noise filtering and compression and equalizing. I had to get a sibilance filter because the sibilance was really harsh.
There are literally 1,000 cuts in the audio file that I did.
Yeah, that's not even counting all the editing. So, because it was kind of an off-the-cuff lecture that we're drawing from, and we wanted to make it sound a little bit more like YouTube-y, more like a video essay. So the idea behind it is like, what if Michael Perini made a YouTube video?
Yeah. Right.
What if Michael Perini made a YouTube essay? And plus, I also wanted to give Michael Perini a little bit of a comeuppance, because if you're not familiar with Michael Perini, he has a constant. He's had a decades-long battle with audio equipment, where like every time he goes to a university to do a lecture, every time without fail, they have severe audio problems, and he gets really fucking mad about it. And he says all the time, like, why can't universities just get their shit together with audio? Like, so anyway, the idea was let's give Michael Parenti's voice like a good chance.
All right, to the main topic today.
Main topic. Okay.
Fascism and its origin.
The more audio trouble you have, the more left you are. Parenti is simply the best of us. All right. So, let's start with the question we had earlier, which was like, does fascism come from the left?
Yeah.
This is a controversial question, obviously. Yeah. And a lot of leftists, whether you're talking about communists or anarchists or whatever, feel like admitting that there are strains of leftist thought and especially corrupted, shitty leftist ideas that were foundational to fascism, they feel like that somehow weakens socialism. But I don't think so. I think it's important for us to recognize how the ideas of people like Marx and other, communist and anarchist thought leaders can be corrupted, or how some people can just have really, really bad ideas, like the people we're going to talk about today.
Really shitty people.
There are indeed sort of like revolutionary anti-capitalist origins to the ideas of fascism that Mussolini developed. And then the other thing so let's talk a little about the history first of Mussolini and Italian fascismo versus German National Socialism fascism. Okay. They are, because I think if we put those two side by side, you can start to see some of the ways in which the DNA of fascism was like originated. Okay. So first, let's talk about Mussolini, because he was kind of first. Okay?
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
So Mussolini came out of a background as he dabbled in communism and anarchism. He became a leader in the syndicalist movement for a while. Yeah. And he was very, very inspired by a French writer named Georges Sorel. Georges Sorel. I don't know, I'm gonna call him Sorel for the
Yeah.
purpose of this. So Sorel was basically the father of what we call syndicalism, and we're going to talk a lot about Sorel's ideas and how they impacted Mussolini. But basically, Sorel originally considered himself a Marxist, but then he felt like Marx basically didn't, his predictions didn't come true, and he believed that there was this big crisis of Marxism. And I'm really, really shorthanding this, but so he developed this kind of more anarchist philosophy that was very anti-state and very anti-democracy. And it was also very, very idealist and developed to become very chauvinist as well. And Sorel's, one of the essays that we're going to look at today talks about how Sorel's dogmatic, anti-authoritarian, anti-state positions created a window through which anti-Semitism crept into his worldview. And to this day, a lot of people oppose the state because of anti-Semitic.
That's George Soros, by the way.
George Soros. So George Soros has all these ideas about syndicalism, and the basic idea is, first of all, it's like in Sorel's conception of syndicalism, it's very anti-democratic. It views democracy as another form of hierarchy and oppression, basically. And it talks a lot about mythology, and it says that basically the thing that moves history is mythologies, whether it's religious mythology or whatever. And he said that the general strike would be the basis for the mythology of the anti-capitalist revolution. And Mussolini took these ideas.
So many wrong things over here, but okay.
And molded them in with far right-wing nationalism. Because one of the things Sorel advocated for was nationalism, and Mussolini took that to another extreme. And Sorel also had a fascination with political violence, which we'll read about too as well. And Mussolini took all those ideas and packaged them and repackaged them and created fascism. Now, Mussolini, of course, has this background in socialism, anarchism, communism, Marxism, and basically inverted a lot, the core ideas of those things into fascism, which became an anti-Bolshevik, anti-communist philosophy. And as early as like 1918, 1919, the fascist black shirts were rising in popularity by attacking communists and unionists and anarchists and people who were actually anti-capitalist. They were bankrolled by the most prominent capitalists in Italy from the get-go. And right away in like 1922, Mussolini basically had, so the capitalists were like soft supporting Mussolini, and he had people who were working as like power brokers to get him in front of capitalists and to get him in front of the royal family in Italy and the nobles. So he was building all these connections. And then in 1922, the capitalists, they had these things called business associations in Italy that were these huge organizations of capitalists. So there was the Confederation of Industry, the Confederation of Agriculture, and the Confederation, or the National Bank Association. They all got together. Though this was 1919? I'm sorry, I got two things confused. In 1919, before all that happened, Mussolini met with a bunch of prominent capitalists who bankrolled and supported the March on Rome. Yeah. Which is when, and basically what these, so for instance, the founder of the Fiat Motor Company, who was a big, wealthy person, his name, I can't remember his name right now, but he said that we need the fascists in power because they're the ones that can control labor. They're the ones that can basically smash organized labor and keep capitalists in power. And they helped support the March on Rome and basically negotiated with the established parliament a channel for fascists to enter the government in Italy. So then by 1922, that's when all the big trade associations like industry, agriculture, and banks came together, and they said, we're going to put Mussolini in charge, and this is to prevent a communist revolution in Italy. And so that was Mussolini's path to power. And then basically they just gutted and destroyed communism and worker-owned unions, worker-operated unions. They created like fascist labor organizations to replace unions. And and then in the 1930s, more than a decade later, is when Mussolini sat down and wrote what he called the doctrine of fascism. And in that document, he says clearly that first of all, we didn't have any ideology at the beginning. We were just focused entirely on action, totally focused on practice. We didn't care about theory at the time. We were just worried about what would get results. So essentially, I mean, in my opinion, that's a formula for opportunism, right? If you're only concerned with action and have no concern for theory or or having any kind of clear goal of what you want your movement to do, you're just an opportunist trying to grab power.
Well, they did that because they want to fool people into fighting for them without like questioning them,
Right.
Just like Pol Pot where you have a Mussolini and Hitler in the West, we have a freaking Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge.
Oh, that's what we're going to talk about. Is that this is a pattern that repeats itself again and again and again and again. It never stops. Like anytime socialism, communism, anti-capitalism starts to become popular, one of these virulent strains of fascism will form.
Yeah.
So it forms again and again and again, and it's always suited to the material conditions of whatever society it's forming in. And it's happening right now. We're seeing it happen right now online, for instance, because like it's kind of weird because now we have this big online subculture that is anti-capitalist, and the fascists are absolutely opportunistically coming in.
Look at how many fascists literally disguising as anti-imperialists online now. I can't stand it.
Right. And disguised as anarchists and disguised as communists. So
fucking MAGA communists.
Omega Haxor had a good.
There they are.
Omega Haxor had a good comment. It says, as an anarchist, you either overcome your reactionary views and become a socialist, or you fall into them and become a fascist. I think that's true of anybody who's anti-capitalist. Because what happens is the fascists will take the grievances and the rhetoric and even the aesthetics of communism and anarchism and leftism and the genuine concerns that people have, and then they warp and twist them opportunistically into their twisted ideology. And yes, there are definitely. Jason asked if there are people in Vietnam that are neoliberal. Yes, there are a lot. There are a lot.
Sadly,
if you want to meet them, just come to any like quote unquote expat area in Vietnam. You'll find a bunch of them. So, all right. All right. Let me go to the first. I guess. Okay. Hold on. I didn't finish yet. So that was Mussolini's origin story. Mussolini came from this kind of overtly leftist background. Was very enamored with the ideas of syndicalism. And by the way, Georges Sorel didn't just influence fascism. Georges Sorel's ideas were extremely popular in like every radical ideological movement. I would say for the worst, not for the better, in the early 20th century. So a lot of people were trying to kind of like, it's not exactly as prominent, I don't think, but it's kind of similar to how Hegel like changed the like there was a ground shift because of Hegel's ideas, and then everyone was trying to like incorporate Hegel into their ideas with the young Hegelians, and make them like modernize them and stuff. It's kind of a similar thing where a lot of people were taking Sorel's ideas and trying to use them. And I think that was a huge mistake. And Sorel's ideas were, drawn from like people like Bernays and Bernstein and people who were just like super reactionary.
Edward Bernstein, man.
Yeah. So, not Bernays, Bernstein. Yeah. So they were like, which Bernstein, and we'll talk about Bernstein more in a minute. Bernstein was like a huge chauvinist, was totally pro-colonial, and thought that colonialism would be good for the working class.
I can talk about Edward Bernstein like for.
You will have an opportunity. We're gonna when we reference Bernstein in the articles.
Yeah.
You will have the floor for Bernstein.
Yeah.
But first, I want to go back to National Socialism in Germany because it has a different sort of like origin story, but you'll see how they kind of tie together in the end. So with National Socialism in Germany, you have the Nazis. Oh, for sure. Yeah. We're going to talk about that too.
Yes.
Here's why, because they have a lot to do with like esoteric mythology.
Worshipping one single being.
Worshipping one leader. Yeah, there's a lot of pedigree with cult. I mean, fascism is essentially a cult.
It is a cult. It is political.
It's got a lot of cult-like characteristics, at least. So, yeah, for sure. And this goes into why that is a lot, what we're going to be talking about today. Now, let's look at National Socialism in Germany. Hitler had a totally different origin story than Mussolini in the sense that Hitler was first and foremost like a soldier during World War I, and he had like no life, or he was like a failure before World War I.
Yeah.
And he even initially, so he was a failed artist. He, as everybody knows, he was homeless for a while. He didn't really have any strong family connections.
Yeah, he was.
He was just kind of like this loser, basically. And then he dodged the draft initially in Austria, and then in Germany he got into the military.
Oh yes, he was Austrian.
Yeah,
I learned about that.
He considered Austria to be like revisionist and that they were actually all just Germans. But anyway, so in World War I, he kind of finds an identity for himself for the first time, and he goes really, really hardcore into the idea of being a soldier. And that was like his whole personality. And the people that he was like in the trenches with would say that like he never got mail from any family members. He didn't really like to go on leave. He just wanted to like be a dude bro soldier.
Yeah.
And that was like his whole identity. And then if you kind of know a little bit about World War I, you know that like when the war ended, there was this big huge myth. It's not true. But a lot of the soldiers believed that Germany was winning at that time.
Yeah.
A lot, there were some instances.
It's not true.
Yeah, there were instances where like the German army was actually advanced into French territory and they thought they were winning. In fact, the economy of Germany had basically collapsed. There was no path to victory for Germany, and that's why they surrendered. Yeah. But the soldiers couldn't admit that they just lost the war. A lot of them didn't, and Hitler was one of them. And so they created all these crackpot theories about how it was like Jewish people that betrayed the Kaiser and blah, 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 betrayed the soldiers. And that's where a lot of the anti-Semitic rhetoric came from right off the bat. And then Hitler, after the war, he fell into these like kind of like barracks for veterans, where it was sort of like a homeless shelter for veterans because the economy was so bad and all these soldiers were just like dumped out on the streets. And he started hanging around with all these different political groups, and he became a spy for the government. And he went to spy on the Nazis, if I'm not mistaken, and got into a debate with somebody about how they were like anti-German. And then that got the attention of the National Socialist leadership, and he got into the movement. And they were from the get-go very anti-communist. They had the brown shirts attacking communists from the beginning. And Hitler didn't have any kind of like socialist background at all. He was like super anti-communist, super anti-Semitic, super chauvinistic about Germany, a racist, pretty much from the beginning. If you want an idea of how pseudoscientific the beliefs that were running around at the time were, one of the reasons that they chose the swastika was because in the 19th century, there was a German archaeologist who basically believed that he discovered Troy, the lost city of Troy, like where the Trojans come from. And in the archaeological site that he dug up, there were swastika motifs, right? And then a later German historian said, hey, that swastika looks a lot like swastikas that are in ancient German sites. And then the Nazis took that very flimsy piece of evidence and said, oh, well, this obviously means that there was some ancient German super race that controlled Troy and had this global empire. And it's just like this ridiculous abuse of logic and history.
That's a symbol that we use like boot.
I know they used it in like indigenous, what we now call America, like in Turtle Island. They used it everywhere. It's like a global phenomenon. But the Germans were just like, oh, they had that in Troy and they also had it in Germany. Therefore, Germany must have been the real Troy. Like it's just ridiculous. So anyway, you see that Hitler has this different origin story from Mussolini. Never really dabbled in communism or socialism, but he had been observing Mussolini. And also there were more Mussolini-style fascists in the Nazi party. In fact, most of the Sturmabteilung, aka the brown shirts, who were the paramilitary wing of the Nazi party at the time, followed these brothers called the Strasser brothers. And the Strasser brothers were essentially anti-capitalist in a sense, but they wanted to have this like Aryan supremacist version of socialism.
Yep.
Where you get rid of the capitalist class and you have a working class dominated, an Aryan dominated working class.
Yep.
And that was what the Strassers wanted. That's called Strasserism.
Yeah.
And Hitler used them as long as they were useful until the Night of the Long Knives, when he had them all killed. And then all that time he was building power with the capitalist elite in Germany and basically doing exactly what Mussolini did in practice, which was get in really good with the capitalists, use your shock troops. Mussolini used the black shirts and Hitler used the brown shirts to go in and break strikes and suppress organized proletariat movements, communists and unionists and anarchists and the sort, and basically opportunistically got to the point where he had enough power with the capitalists that he could afford to just murder all the Strasserites, which is exactly what he did. So you basically see that in Italy and in Germany, you have opportunism, which tries to take socialist thought and ideas, which were very popular at the time, communism and socialism and anarchism and all these things, very popular at the time, and they use them opportunistically to create an anti-communist movement, which in the end serves the bourgeois power structure. So there was one historian who called fascists the bodyguards of capitalism, which in a lot of ways they were, because the bourgeois people at that time, the capitalists at the time, they didn't want to get their hands dirty.
Exactly, and they were terrified of the future of communist revolution.
Oh, 100%. They were terrified of communist revolution, and they also didn't want to get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the stomach for violence that the fascists did. Mm-hmm. They thought that the fascists would be their, like, kind of, as they say, useful idiots that they could control forever. And they thought, okay, we can't be seen to go bust up these strikes and fight these communists and unionists, but we can send these fascists in to do it for us. And then we can give them a little bit of, token power, but in the end, we'll be controlling them because we control the purse strings and everything. That's not how it ended up. It ended up where the fascists, seized complete power. Yeah. And they do it very quickly when they pull the trigger.
And I see the same pattern going on in America right now. And I see, like liberals and neoliberals supporting, fascist rallies against, leftist communists, socialists, and anarchists. Is because like they think that those fascists are useful idiots and they can just use them to like smash on our movement. And once we are completely eliminated, they can like somehow win against those fascists. Like, are you a ding ass?
Yeah. So yeah, you have different ways of getting to the same conclusion. So a few things we can learn from this. A is that they're extremely opportunist. They're incoherent ideologically, but they serve a rational purpose for the capitalist class.
Yep, it's a very rational purpose.
The capitalist class enables them every single time. It happens again and again. If you look at like Pinochet, for example, in Chile, Pinochet was like a right-hand man of Allende, basically.
Exactly.
And had this kind of like communist military background, but then opportunistically overtook the government and instituted fascism with the backing of the liberal bourgeoisie elements of Chile and with the liberal USA government. The CIA supported that as well. You could see it just happen again and again and again, where fascism has always opportunistically used our ideas against it. It goes so deep. It's like the reason that the flag of the Nazi, Third Reich was red was because they wanted to steal the aesthetics of socialism. Yeah. It was like they called themselves the National Socialist German Workers' Party because they wanted to seize that rhetoric. But what they did was they usually had this kind of monism where instead of saying, okay, we're a working class movement, they try to transform that into, oh, we're an Aryan movement. We're a Italian movement we're the descendants of the Roman Empire. We don't need class division anymore. We're going to just basically say, okay, every German is a German, whether you're a capitalist or a worker, and we're all going to work together. If you read Black Shirts and Reds by Perini, it goes into very strong detail about this.
Sounds like the Maya communists.
Well, that's what it is. I mean, it's the same thing. No, it doesn't sound like it. It is. That's what it is. That's exactly what
you're
doing.
It doesn't matter what though you are. You all Americans.
No, it's very important that we all understand that that's not. It doesn't sound like it. That's what it is.
It is. That's what it is.
Okay, and that opportunistically using the socialist idea. Like, look, I want to show you the trick so you can see it when it happens, and it's happening all over the place right now, and it's especially happening in places where they're led by aesthetics. Yeah. Okay, and that's really dangerous, and it happens a lot, and they call it like radical subjectivity. Okay. Radical subjectivity it's basically like revolution, which is based on the idea of vibes. It's basically based on vibes. Yeah. It's like, I don't like capitalism. I don't like the way things are right now. And from there, I will be led by emotion. Mm. And that's where Sorrell says that we need to be using mythology. Sorrell's wrong, but Sorrell says that that's why mythology should be the basis for our movement, because people are so
idealists.
It's not just idealist. It leads to chauvinism and bigotry and all kinds of other things as well, as we'll see. Can you correlate what you're saying into today's context? I mean, Luna just did. MAGA communism and patriotic socialism and that sort of thing. When you take chauvinist attitudes and aesthetics, and you let those guide your movement, which is just opportunistically seizing.
That is why you see now, the communist, socialist, Marxists call themselves MAGA communists. You see, quote unquote, anarchists who support NATO.
Yeah, right.
That's the aesthetic we're talking
it's
about.
It's like vibes based.
Yes.
Well, let's start reading this article.
Yeah.
I've got one article ready to go.
I'm turning into a cocoon right now. It's when things get.
I know Luna's already. I'm hot. I don't know how you can be cold. All right, let me get this going here. Present the screen share. Okay. Share screen.
And I mean, in the meantime, I could talk about same freaking thing happened in Southeast Asia, man.
Oh, Pol Pot.
Pol Pot. He started in the 30s and in the 40s. Some student that was very interested in communism and socialism and kind of look up to Lenin and Marx and Ho Chi Minh too. And in the 50s, he assassinated his way into the Communist Party of Cambodia, the CPK, and then he became the leader of that Communist Party of Cambodia, and he got all the support from Vietnam, Laos, and China at that time too. And right after he gained our independence in 1975, he immediately showed his true face was of being a literary fascist who wants to destroy everything and start everything from scratch. And a lot of people couldn't believe me when I told them that one of the main policies of Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge at that time was that they want to destroy all the previous knowledge, including medicine knowledge, because he thought that it was the product of the city, and the city is the real disease of society. We need to get rid of the city. That was what they believed. And what they did was that they burned all the books, they destroyed all the knowledge, and they sent literal teenagers to go and study medicine all the way from scratch. Lots of Westerners cannot believe it. It was too much for them to process, but it was literally that. It was in a museum of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, represented by Cambodians themselves. So yeah, that is literally like the truth.
Mm-hmm. I think it would be helpful before we read this article to talk about the characteristics of. Here, I'm going to get a little blank space up here. The essence, the essential and character, the essential like foundational properties of fascism, and then some of the characteristics that it has. So let me get my notes on that. Hold on. And then I'm going to have this note-taking app up. Okay, we're almost ready here, folks.
Mm-hmm. Fascism is not materialist, it's idealist. Yes, but it starts from aesthetic.
Well, it's just idealism.
It's idealism.
Yeah. Right.
It's not from an idea.
The fascists reject materialism completely. And it's kind of weird because they reject materialism, and they say that they have this kind of fideism in many cases where the Nazis believe that the Aryans had a mystical destiny. I mean, how unmaterial can you get?
Yeah, right.
And that their destiny was to reign for 1,000 years and stuff like that. But at the same time,
their destiny was to rule over other people. It's like, what? Yeah. How can you get more idealists than that?
Right. But what you have to understand is at the same time, they were also really only focused on practice. And theory was just written to excuse the practice that they were doing.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting.
Pseudoscience, pseudo-theory.
All right. It is very complex, by the way. Brandon B says, this is a good conversation. We don't talk about these complexities enough sometimes. Well, and there's a reason that a lot of people shy away from this. And it's because a lot of people think that I don't know. I think sometimes it comes from a good place where it's you think if we admit that there were socialist thinkers like Sorel and Bernstein and who else? Kautsky, Proudhon, Bakunin, who had terrible, horrible ideas that led to basically fascism and all kinds of horrible things. If we admit that, we're somehow hurting the left, but we're not. I mean, I think that admitting where people have gone off the rails is very, very important so that we don't do it again and so that we recognize it when it happens today. I think that's just common sense to me. So let's talk about the three essential. This is all, by the way, rooted in the work of Michael Perini. I think that Michael Perini has done a really excellent job. He doesn't ever use the dialectical materialist buzzwords, really. Like, he doesn't talk about things in terms of contradiction stuff. But if you really pay attention to what he's saying, I think it's rooted in dialectical materialism. It's rooted in relationships and the way things develop. And so he's developed this definition of fascism that I find very useful.
Yeah, I want to make this clear too. Wait about Pol Pot being want to bring back the Uncle Empire. That's exactly that. That's just like the Hitler is the Aryan race.
Yes,
and then Pol Pot is
mythology.
The Uncle Empire.
It's mythology.
Yeah, the same thing.
That's exactly what we're going to be talking about today.
And now we're talking about white supremacists.
It's all about having a mythology and this esoteric mysticism that drives your movement.
Yeah.
And that is one of the big corrupting factors of materialist communism, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's totally opposes to what we actually believe. So, okay, let's talk about three essential foundational elements of fascism according to Perini, okay? One is that it is...
Bye, Skylar.
Fairly well. One is that it is... Thank you for joining us. Sorry, I'm very focused on drawing because I have writing because I have terrible writing.
Oh, yeah, you do have a... Yeah, I'm sorry. I can have...
All right, we don't have to have a... We don't... It's fine. I'm just taking my time. Okay? They can read it. Pseudo-revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
So what this means is that it presents itself as revolution when in fact it's just serving the capitalist class. And it has a lot of revolutionary rhetoric and aesthetics, and it draws specifically, again, from like communist rhetoric and aesthetics and anarchist rhetoric and aesthetics.
Especially aesthetics, like the red flag and golden star, and then all the shit and talk about workers' liberation,
It rationally serves the ruling class. Okay. That's really important. Okay. It materially, at the end of the day, fascism serves the interests of the ruling class.
Yes.
That's pretty easy to understand. They talk about how it's like a worker, it'll benefit the workers. They act like it's a big revolution against the status quo, but they're actually materially serving the status quo.
Exactly. But then the first thing that they did after they took power was to, smash on the workers' movement.
Right. No, even before they take power.
Even before that,
Irrational mass appeals. Okay. So irrational mass appeals means that it's an incoherent. It doesn't actually make any sense.
Yeah.
They say things that they're vibe based. They say things that maybe sound good, especially if you're very frustrated and if you're uneducated about politics and you don't really know what's causing all of the suffering you're having. If you're a German soldier from World War I and you thought we were winning the war and then suddenly your whole world falls out from under you and you're homeless and the economy has just destroyed itself and you don't understand what happened. A year ago, you felt like you were on top of the world with this great empire that was going to expand forever, and now your whole world has crashed. You don't understand it. Yeah. It's easy to manipulate people like that.
Exactly.
Same thing throughout the world in the early 20th century and up to today. Everyone's unstable, and it's very easy to manipulate.
It's just like in Cambodia at that time, they were so poor. They were heavily bombed by the USA, even though they were not even joining the war. And they, instead of blaming why was that, they blamed the freaking, Vietnam for that.
Right. Exactly. So, I'm trying to get more room here. So those are the three, whatever. Okay. Hopefully we'll have enough room here. Forgive me for my terrible drawing and writing skills, but okay, that's the essence. Okay. And these are the three foundational things that virtually every form of fascism will have. Okay. These are basically essential to fascism. It's one of the reasons why, for instance, neoliberalism, generally speaking, in most contexts, is not fascism, although it can be and has been historically and is in some places in the world. But because neoliberalism is already the status quo, and neoliberals are generally telling you, hey, the status quo works fine, we just need to adjust it and fix it, but we're happy with the way things are, there isn't really sometimes you have things like a kind of a hybrid thing where there's like for instance, the DNC's hashtag resist.
Oh my gosh.
The hashtag resist campaign. That's kind of almost like a little fascist program of the DNC because it's like pseudo revolution. But generally speaking, neoliberalism it's a very violent and brutal and oppressive ideology.
Yeah.
But unless it has these three essential characteristics of being pseudo-revolutionary, rationally serving the ruling class, and irrationally making mass appeals, which you could argue that neoliberalism has some tendencies in that direction.
2 out of 3.
And that's because fascism and neoliberalism have a dialectical relationship and influence each other. But I don't think that essentially tells you what neoliberalism is.
Yeah.
Now, the mistake I think people make is to think that neoliberalism is somehow better or less destructive or less horrible than fascism. Neoliberalism is extremely violent and tyrannical and has killed millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
You know? So don't think that I'm like giving neoliberalism a pass by saying that it's not essentially like fascist in this sense, and according to Perini's definition. But anyway, I digress. Let's talk now about the characteristics. Now, these are a little bit more fluid, and they're not always going to be present. You're not always going to have all 5 of these things present, and they might present themselves in really a lot of different ways, but they generally, you'll see them crop up again a lot. So you can think of it in this, if you've kind of been brushing up on your dialectical materialism with me and Luna, or if you want to go study this later, you can go to the book that we translated, and this part, the essence is essence, and the characteristics you can think of as phenomena. And you can read about the category pair of essence and phenomena. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about that today, but basically essence are things that are part of the stable internal relationships that make something what it is.
Yes.
And phenomena are things that
it expresses
something
itself
expresses
to the human eyes,
human
to
senses.
the nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the characteristics are things you often observe with fascism, but the essential properties are things that are just inherent to what makes fascism what it is.
Yeah.
So, and Matthew, this was me. Okay, Matthew says this. I don't think you should feel bad about this because I had the same start as you do.
Yeah.
My start with all of this shit, anti-capitalism and everything, was totally vibes based. Not gonna lie, and it's taken me a long time to get more of a material basis. And but what's important is that we recognize it, right? And it's like anything with communism, anything with any of this stuff. We're not going to be perfect from the get-go. We're going to make mistakes, but what's important is what you do when you realize that you've made a mistake, right? And you improve. Okay, so let's look at the phenomena. So number
Fascism.
1 would be glorification of a leadership cult.
Leadership.
You obviously see that very often.
Mussolini, Hitler, Pol Pot. Can't be more clear than that.
Sometimes this can be abstractified. So instead of having a specific individual leader, you have some kind of group or dogmatic position or something that you glorify as sort of guiding the movement.
I mean, my communists glorify Trump.
Yeah, that's a specific example. But well, you could think about the alt-right before Trump became the leader. Remember this? I don't know if you can even remember this, but there was a time before Trump really emerged as the strong leader of the MAGA movement. For years, there was an alt-right, and there were a lot of figures that were leaders, and they did try to generate cults for themselves. But there were a lot of places where there was like this kind of power struggle. And obviously, the National Socialist Party before Hitler rose to power. Hitler didn't start the National Socialist Party. He came in and seized power within it, but he definitely wasn't there all along. So sometimes there's just like in the embryonic stage especially, there is a search for power, a search for a cult, but it hasn't quite established a leader yet, right? So that's one of the things where it's a phenomenon. There's this association with a leadership cult. Number 2 would be glorification of the nation state. Now, you don't always see this, okay? And in fact, there are forms of fascism, strains of fascism that emerge from anarchism that are anti-state. I want to say that right off the bat. It's not the most common kind.
Yeah.
It's a lot less common than the kinds of fascists that want to glorify the state. The other thing is, before fascists have seized power within the state, they will be very critical of the state. Like Hitler, before the Nazis seized power, was extremely critical of the Weimar Republic.
Yep.
And the same goes for Mussolini before he seized power. They were critical of the state until they seized power of the state. So you have to think about it in terms of the historical development of the movement and where they stand in that movement.
Same as Pol Pot.
Exactly.
was extremely critical of the previous government of Cambodia run by the royal family and then the Lieutenant General backed by the USA, and he wanted to destroy that. But once he took power, he became a fascist.
Exactly. So the glorification of military conquest and jingoism. So I'll just write militarism.
Yeah.
Forgive my handwriting. I just
Jingoism.
So you tend to see some kind of nationalism, some kind of chauvinism, and a glorification of violence and military conquest, and that sort of thing.
Japan also the same thing, literally like the worship, of the Japanese supreme leader and the king, and also military.
Yeah. So Trump draining. Wait, go back to the last one, the glorification of the nation state. Yes, Sonny Bits, absolutely. The whole idea of Trump draining the swamp, and the whole idea of QAnon was this idea that there was going to be this big seizure of the state. Now, the thing is, though, that they were also glorifying the USA. The whole thing was Make America Great Again. So they're criticizing the current state, but they are glorifying the nation, right, with the right-wing nationalism. So absolutely, that's a really good observation.
We should talk about fascism in Japan more. It doesn't get talked about enough.
Oh, yeah. Japan was absolutely fascist.
Absolutely
Luna's
fascist.
going to do a video about the fascism in Japan.
Yes.
One of the reasons that we pretend in the West that Japan was never fascist is because...
It was BS.
Right. One of the reasons that we pretend that is because there was never really... they never changed at all who was in power in Japan.
No.
They kept the fascists in power in Japan after the war, and they're in power to this day. But to recognize that would basically be to admit that we were working with the fascists in rebuilding Japan.
Japan became fascist even years before Hitler took power. So it was like before Nazi Germany and right after fascist Italy.
Hold on. A couple of people in a couple of different chats have pointed out that these things are not exclusive to fascism. Right.
Right.
You're right.
You're right.
For instance, leadership cult, you had that long before fascism ever existed.
Yes.
I mean, monarchy is a leadership cult, right? You worship the king. Leadership cults are not exclusive to fascism by any means. None of these characteristics are exclusive to fascism.
Yes.
These are just phenomena that fascism tends to exude, that you will observe often and frequently, but you will also see them in other things.
Yeah. That's why we said from the start, and when we started this section, is that like essence and phenomena. Essence are the three things right here, 1, 2, 3, that define a thing, right? It's define fascism. And phenomena characteristics, it's just how it expressed to human sense and human understanding, so you can learn about it more. It's
very important not to get metaphysical about this. This is not like a checklist.
Yeah, it's not.
You check these things off and it's like, okay, well, they have this, 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 and this, therefore they are fascist. You have to understand the relationships and everything. Fascism is a specific political form that has specific internal and external relationships and develops according to certain patterns that we see again and again and again. Okay. So it's not like every single pseudo-revolutionary movement ever is fascist.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say a lot of things about Bernie Sanders. I wouldn't say that the Bernie Sanders pseudo-revolution, which is what it was, right? Bernie Sanders' campaign for president, both of them,
it was pseudo.
They were fake revolutions. Yes. It's like the idea was that, I'm going to go in and change everything. But essentially, he was never really challenging capitalism.
No.
He said that he thinks capitalism is like the greatest way to have innovation and stuff. So Bernie Sanders was pseudo-revolutionary, but I wouldn't argue that Bernie Sanders is a fascist. You know what I'm saying? So you have to really understand how all these things work together. And you have to understand the difference between essence and phenomena. Okay. Now, militarism and jingoism, you'll see with neoliberals.
Yeah.
Neoliberals are extremely militaristic and extremely jingoistic.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is very quick to, drop bombs on other people and is very nationalistic. Yeah. You can't deny it. So that's not exclusive to fascism. Okay. Okay. So, and then after that, we have propagation of folk mysticism, xenophobia, and racism. Okay. These are important. Folk mysticism, xenophobia. Oh my God, this pen's doing this thing it does sometimes.
Yeah. I don't get it.
All I can do is restart it.
Xenophobia and racism.
Oh, I hate when it does this.
Like too sensitive?
Yes. I might just have to stop using it, but I hope not. All right, we're just going to have to stop using it, I guess.
Okay.
Okay, it's working again. Xenophobia. Oh. Hold on. I think I fixed it, but I also broke it at the same time. This thing is so useful when it works, and then when it doesn't work, it's such a pain in the ass. When we finally get our studio set up, I'm going to have a whole better way of doing this that I've got planned. Oh, we got disconnected from the internet, I guess. On the tablet.
Oh. All right. All right.
Talk for a little bit, Luna.
Mysticism and xenophobia and racism. Yes, I mean the whole point of the existence of fascism is, they believe that they are superior to other races, other peoples. That's why they believe they have the right to rule over other people. Japan. Now let's talk about Japanese fascism. They believe that they are the honorable Asian Aryans. Can you believe that? Is that they made up whole science to give them the right to rule over other people, and they call them the Asian Aryans. And it was, I don't know.
It can manifest in a lot of different ways too. It's not always racism. It can have all kinds of manifestations. For instance, a lot of fascists these days are using prejudice against trans people as like a basis for what you could call a form of bigotry, queerphobia, right? There have been all kinds of different forms of supremacism, right? But the whole idea is that, again, remember I was talking about earlier about monism and how they're saying like our group is better than every other group. There's an interesting thing about this too, and it leads to this contradiction that can't be resolved by fascism. And it's one of the reasons why fascism pretty much always fails. I think I'm spitballing right now. Okay, this is not coming from Perini, so I'm going to take this down for a second. But I happen to think that one of the problems that fascism has is that they say, okay, we are the superior people and we should control everything. We should dominate everything. But they have to resort to the capitalist class to get their power. The source of their power is the capitalist class. And that creates a contradiction and a conflict that can never really be resolved.
Yep.
So when Hitler says the Aryans are the master people, blah, 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 the Aryans should rule the world, blah, 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 he is really contradicting himself, because the people who actually control the society at the end of the day in Nazi Germany were the capitalists. They controlled the means of production. Now, they did over time try to curtail that. And so like by the very end of the war, see, one thing that's interesting about Nazi Germany is that they didn't switch over to a total war strategy where the government completely controlled capital until the very end of the war. And it was really an act of desperation. And a big part of their propaganda early on was that, oh, look, we don't have to do what the USA does, because the USA had this total war thing where they basically they went to a command economy where they were like, okay, this factory's not making cars anymore, they're making tanks. This factory's not making, games anymore, you're making weapons, whatever. The government was literally telling companies what to do. Hitler and the Nazis avoided doing that until very close to the end of the war, because part of their ideology was, look, Aryans working together across class lines can do anything, and we don't need to tell the capitalists what to do, because we're all Aryans and we're all in this together, blah, 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 blah. And it was like just towards the end of the war that they had a big, huge assembly in the sports plots, I think, and they had a big speech about how now we're going to switch to the command economy. And it was an act of desperation, and it contradicted everything they'd been saying up until that point. So anyway, they have this. I believe that's an internal contradiction into fascism. Okay. So folk mysticism, xenophobia, and racism. The mysticism is very important to understand. Okay, they always have pseudoscientific beliefs. They always have this fascination with mythology, and that comes directly from Sorel, which we will read about. Hopefully, we might actually have to do a two-parter on this because we're still in the foundations here, and we haven't even started the articles yet. The last thing, and this is very important, and Perini points out that this doesn't get talked about much in the West at all. Opposition to working class movements, basically. Organized proletarian movements. Communists, unionists, that sort of thing. They directly oppose communism, what they call Bolshevism, anarchism, which is, real anarchism, which would be anti-capitalist and, opposed to all this bullshit.
I mean, the whole thing of Mussolini and Hitler was that they form an alliance against Bolshevism.
They called themselves, what was the word that they used? Like Mussolini specifically called fascism like the crusade against Bolshevism or something like that. I can't remember the exact word, but something against Bolshevism. And they defined themselves as oppositional to working class organized proletarian movements like communism. And that's how they got their money and their power from the beginning, from the capitalist class. They were always working hand in glove with the capitalist class. Okay, that's very important, and it does not get talked about enough. Now, something I want to talk about real quick, too, is how this gets bowdlerized and changed in history. If you go and look into Mussolini and the founder of Fiat, for instance, right? They always try to adjust the biography of every capitalist that worked with the Nazis and that worked with the Italian fascists, that worked with Franco, that worked with Pinochet. They always try to make it look like, oh, no, these were actually anti-fascists who were in a bad position and they had to do what they could. So they'll say, oh, the founder of Fiat, he was actually opposed to fascism and he tried to liberalize it. It was blah, 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 blah. No, he was a fascist. He worked with the fascists. He said specifically, the reason I support the fascists is because they are the most likely to be able to rein in the organized proletariat movements. Okay. He was a fascist. And then as things started to not go the way he wanted it to, yeah, I mean, he didn't agree with Mussolini about everything. That doesn't mean he wasn't a fascist who bought into fascism and supported fascism and bankrolled fascism. Okay, and that's true of all these huge capitalists at the time who supported fascism. Okay, they all opportunistically decided we're going to support fascism to protect our own capitalist interests from these huge working class movements. I'm checking in on the chat now. Kai said, I believe you're talking about the relationship between capitalists and fascists. I don't necessarily see it as a contradiction, more as a symbiotic relationship. Okay. So let's first dissect the two different ways you can use the word contradiction. One is the kind of like traditional metaphysical sense, the non-dialectical material sense, which it just means like they oppose each other and they can't both exist at the same time. If that makes sense, like a logical contradiction. And then the other is the dialectical materialist definition of contradiction, which is that two things have a relationship that mutually develop one another. I think that both definitions kind of work here, but let's just go with the dialectical materialist definition. They do develop one another, okay? So fascism always starts out as this big radical revolutionary thing, but it always ends up bloating into the status quo once it has gained enough power, once it takes control of the state, right? And the capitalists also, they develop as well with fascism. They become more fascistic, in fact, usually over time, which we're seeing happen in the USA right now. Look, when you have like Black Lives Matter, right? When you have the Black Lives Matter, when you have the George Floyd uprising in 2020, the capitalists were really paying attention to what was going on right there. And when they saw Black people and people in the streets basically defending Black folks in the streets and attacking capitalism in the streets, at the same time, and recognizing and identifying the relationship between racism and capitalism and that sort of thing, who was going in the streets fighting the people in the uprising, fighting the revolutionaries who were trying to change society and who were opposing capitalism? The people who were fighting them were the Nazis, the Proud Boys. The capitalists were watching that and paying attention. They know who's on their side.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. So, but anyway, yeah. But I don't think that the fascists will ever be satisfied with not holding the real power. But they have to support capitalism to have any power at all. So that's like that's something that's constantly going to be a problem for fascists, and I think it often like leads to the problems that lead to the collapse of fascism, or at least it's something that we should be able to take advantage of and try to make that contradiction, drive that contradiction as anti-fascists, right? Okay, so all right. Fascists are basically employees of capitalists. I mean, it started that way with the National Socialists, and then they did see, it's a power struggle. It's a power struggle. I think they start out as like servants of fascism and going around and breaking strikes and that sort of thing. But then they'll seize power. Yeah.
They will go back and control the capitalists.
Right. This is a really important point too. Yeah. Perini points this out in Black Shirts and Reds and in The Functions of Fascism, that the economy under the Nazis was horrible. It was worse than under the Weimar Republic.
Yes.
That never gets talked about either. I was taught in school that like Mussolini made the trains run on time and Germany made things better and built the Autobahn and blah, 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 blah. No, the actual material conditions for working class people in Nazi Germany were worse, and there was less consumption.
Yes.
Which I think is a really important point.
Remember that the minimum wage at that time for the workers was like cut in half under Hitler and Mussolini.
Right. Yes. They were terrible governors in addition to all the other problems.
The economy of Cambodia under Pol Pot was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They literally went back to agrarian society with nothing.
Our Chilean comrade Kai says, this reminds me of Pinochet. They also believe Chile was better off under Pinochet, which is factually false. And it's kind of like how every Republican I know thinks that. I mean, this is different, but sort of the same. And Democrats do this too, by the way. Every time there's a Republican office, the Democrats say that it was better under the Democrat. And every time there's a Democrat in office, the Republicans say it was better under the Republican. It's like people don't have a clear vision of their own histories and their own lives. People can really have a distorted view through like these kinds of indoctrination activities. So, all right. Do you have a structure of how capitalists suffered under fascism, and do you think the current branch of fascism will decrease that risk, at least in America? I wouldn't say that the capitalists really suffered under fascism, but they probably bristled under it. They probably didn't like having someone to struggle. Because, like, okay, if you look at a liberal government, right? A bourgeois liberal government, normal bourgeois democracy, the capitalists, like, look at the USA.
You say right now, it's a perfect example. Does the ruling class right now suffer under fascism? No, they don't.
Well, hold on. Let's go back and look at historically. Like the Weimar Republic or any kind of bourgeois democracy historically, before fascists took over, they just had carte blanche. Like they didn't have anybody to contend with. They totally controlled the show. Mm-hmm. And then when the fascists take over, suddenly they have this other group that they're having to like negotiate with once they have state power, once the fascists have state power. I think that the capitalists don't like that, and I think that the fascists don't like that, and they're sort of like rivals. But they also have it's complicated. Not only are they rivals, but at the same time they also do have this symbiotic relationship where they keep each other in power. So it's an unstable thing, and there's a lot of mistrust. And then fascists themselves are snakes. Like they are like, just look at the collapse of the Nazis. Look at the collapse of Mussolini. They turn on each other. They are all opportunists. The Nazis, like the whole time Hitler was in power, the Nazis were all vying for, power. They were all vying for Hitler's affection. They were all stabbing each other in the back. They were all plotting to kill Hitler. It was just like constant betrayals and intrigues and stuff like that because they didn't have any real solidarity. And the same goes between the fascists and the capitalists. It's just like they don't really like each other. But they do benefit from each other materially. So they have this sort of unbalanced relationship with each other. And remember, like, you have to remember that, like, the fascists don't necessarily like each other, but they are willing to work together and be pragmatic and do what needs to be done for them to get power.
Just like, how the USA under Jimmy Carter and also China under Deng Xiaoping, they have Pol Pot. It doesn't mean they all three of them liked each other.
Right.
But they agreed to work together.
Right.
Cambodia and USA and China shake hands together.
Yep. So, all right, let's look at this article a little bit. We got about 30 minutes left, so we'll get started on this, and we might just have to continue this later. I have several articles, and I have an excerpt from a book. but we're not obviously going to get through all of them today. But here's one. Bad Anarchism, Aestheticized Myth-Making and the Legacy of Georges Sorel. This is by an art historian named Mark Antliff. So I guess we'll read the abstract real quick because that's a good way to, like a roadmap of what's ahead. Okay. So this article considers the varied impact of the notion of revolutionary consciousness first developed by French political theorist Georges Sorel on proponents of anarchism and Marxism, including Walter Benjamin, Bart Delight, Frantz Fanon, Antonio Gramsci, and most recently, Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe. I question the strategy amongst these thinkers to draw selectively from Sorel's writings and attempt to create a cordon sanitaire, which is just like basically a sanitary wall around the bad ideas or the ideas that are shitty, around those aspects of Sorel. I hate that it scrolls such a weird amount.
Wait a minute. In Canada, the Fascist trucker convoy ended when the convoy started blocking trade from passing across the border, affecting businesses, and the capitalists thought that it was revolutionary.
Right. The capitalists don't want their power challenged, and they don't want to lose money.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a good point, yeah. The trucker convoy, by the way, was that idea was first developed by a Vietnamese fascist.
Can you believe that? Yes.
But that's a total side note. If you want to learn more about
total
that.
Side note. It was developed by a Vietnamese fascist.
So anyway,
and,
all right. I question the strategy among those thinkers to draw selectively from Sorel's writings and attempt to create a cordon sanitaire around these aspects of his thought that are problematic by virtue of their impact on proto-fascist and fascist ideologues throughout Europe. In addressing this issue, I examine how Sorel's anarchist theory of anti-statism constructed around the power of myths led him to endorse anti-capitalist anti-Semitism as an extension of class struggle, and I critique his Janus-faced concept of aestheticized violence as it relates to his quest for moral regeneration through revolution. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what he's trying to do here. He's trying to point out that Sorel created these ideas that were used to form fascism, but were also used by people who I actually respect and admire, like Fanon and Gramsci, right? Mm. They also drew from Sorel. And we need to understand, according to this author, we need to understand the ideas of Sorel that we should abandon or be very wary of, or that are not good, so that when we draw from any of these ideas, we know what's actually going on under the hood. Does that make sense? Yeah. You can't just be an eclecticist and just pick up ideas without understanding their origin and understanding how they developed historically, and understanding their relationship to fascism, because that creates all kinds of backdoors for fascists to enter our movements, or to misdirect us, or to mislead us, or to misinform us.
Yes.
So that was the point of this essay. Okay. All right. So that's just a biography of Antliff. You can read that if you want to pause the screen, but I'm moving on. All right. There's George Sorel, by the way. All right. The hell? Oh, okay. Among those theorists whose ideas serve as a catalyst for 20th century anarchism, George Sorel remains the most controversial, primarily due to his own troubled political trajectory and that of his self-proclaimed followers, many of whom were drawn to fascism following Benito Mussolini's rise to power in 1922, the year of Sorel's death. Despite such association, Sorel's notion of revolutionary consciousness and the role he ascribed to myth in constituting and fomenting political activism continued to attract theorists among the left in Europe, including the Marxist Antonio Gramsci, who I reference a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Whose conception of an intellectual and moral bloc was indebted to Sorel, and the prominent champion of ideas of Frantz Fanon, whose seminal books Black Skin, White Masks, and The Wretch of the Earth drew on Sorel's theory to instill revolutionary consciousness among blacks in Europe and Africa. Now, I'm not saying, what am I not saying right now? I'm not saying go burn all your Frantz Fanon and Gramsci books.
No.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that all the ideas of Gramsci and Fanon and all the other people who drew some inspiration from Sorel are like garbage. No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what the author is saying. What we're saying is we need to understand the ideas that they drew from Sorel so we can know exactly what they meant. We can also find ideas that might not have been good and discard those or revise them or whatever. That's the point. So it's like, yes, we do. Like Marx and Engels, they got ideas from everybody, right? They got ideas from all kinds of
from Kant, Hegel.
And bourgeois, Ricardo and Smith, bourgeois economists.
Smith. Yeah.
So there are all kinds of sources of ideas and information and thought. And just because some people drew from Sorrell's ideas doesn't mean that like all of their ideas are bad. But we need to just have an understanding of how and why they drew from Sorrell so that we can decide if we agree with those ideas or not and decide how to move forward based on this understanding. I hope that all makes sense. As Good Morty says, more historical context equals more understanding.
Yeah.
Okay, so continuing. I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. You kind of get the idea. Wait, I did miss one sentence that's important. Walter Benjamin, in his important essay on the critique of violence, interpreted Sorrell's concept of the general strike in terms of the abolition not only of the state apparatus through nonviolent resistance, through refusal to work, but also the destruction of the legal order maintained by the state to justify its oppressive rule. Okay, so a lot of anarchists at the time were drawing from this, in addition to Marxists like Gramsci and, of course, the fascists. So, Sorrell just had a lot of impact. A comparable view is taken up by the anarchist Bart Delight, who likewise endorsed Sorrell's theory in the context of monumental study of direct nonviolent action, The Conquest of Violence, an Essay on War and Revolution, 1937. More recently, the Marxists Ernesto Laclau and Chantal Mouffe have suggested to resuscitate Sorrell's concept of myth and the context of their theory of hegemony and the constitutive role of antagonistic struggle as a catalyst of a theory of revolution, no longer premised on the outmoded Marxist concept of historical necessity. In other words, this seems like it's going into that analytical Marxist direction of trying to remove class struggle and dialectical materialism from Marxism.
Yeah.
Opportunism, not good. Okay. In endorsing Sorrell's theory of myth as an anti-essentialist, anti-determinist tool for political activism, Laclau and Mouffe argue that the later appropriation of Sorrell's thoughts by advocates of fascism was merely one of the possible derivatives from Sorrell's analysis, and by no means a necessary outcome of his ideas. Thus, the endorsement of myth-making by Sorrell's fascist followers and their celebration of war as a mythic catalyst for ethical renewal and proletarian heroism was not necessarily determined by the very structure of Sorrell's thought, which reportedly remained indeterminate. While Laclau and Mouffe failed to address in the extent to which Sorrell's theory of radical subjectivity contained within it the seeds for such ideological volatility, remember, radical subjectivity is basically this idea that you reject the current status quo and then let your vibes lead you from there.
Yeah.
It's you're subjective about everything. It's like, I don't like this. I like that. I like the way that looks. I like the way that feels. It's radical subjectivity. And some people, believe it or not, have said that that is the way forward for revolution. That's the way to have a revolution. In many respects, Sorrell's critique of the Enlightenment as the ideological means by which European democracies establish and maintain power, and his related advocacy of the anti-rational power of myth as the catalyst for revolutionary consciousness. Remember that. Sorrell saw mythology as the anti-rational power of myth as the catalyst for revolutionary consciousness. What are the key words there? Anti-rational, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the catalyst for revolutionary consciousness. We don't want to be anti-rational, but we don't want to be, if you talk, okay, there's two ways to think about rationality. There's rationality in the terms of like using common sense and critical thinking and systemic analysis. And then there's also rationalism as in purely logic-based idealism. So we don't want to be rational like a purely idealist logician where everything is just based on ideas alone. But we also don't want to be like rejecting critical thinking and materialism, right? Which is another form of anti-rationalism, right? So anyway, so this finds an echo in the recourse to myth-making still operative in the work of contemporary anarchist theorists. This unfettered embrace of irrationalism as a means of constituting a politics of by the way, the person who wrote this, I don't think is a Marxist or dialectical materialist. So they're not using these words in the dialectical materialist sense. So we'll have to do some interpretation and stuff as we go along. But anyway,
this unfettered embrace of
yeah,
irrationalism.
I know. This unfettered embrace of rationalism as a means of constituting a politics of revolutionary identity formation carries with it the perils of forming a movement lacking in any critical self-reflection. So if you're building your revolution based on a mythology of yourself and your whatever you deem to be your people, your whether it's like the Aryan race or what have you, Americans, what have you, you are not going to be critically self-reflective because you're basing it on a mythology, a mythos. You're not basing it on material reality. Class analysis is essentially, if done properly, materially based. Now, you can obviously create a mythology of the working class, and I think that's what Sorel advocated for, and that can lead to problems, right? But if you're actually, instead of using mythology analysis or whatever you want to call this, you use actual material class analysis, you're not going to have these problems of lacking the ability to critically self-reflect. And, myth itself has the potential to become a pliant tool in the hands of a self-styled revolutionary or reactionary elite. In other words, if you're just vibe-based, you're just aesthetic-based, you're just mythology-based, it's very easy to be manipulated. It's one of the reasons I really don't like solar punk, because the people who defend solar punk and say solar punk is like a really cool thing, they say specifically, I've seen this specifically said, I'm not going to name any names, but they'll say, oh, solar punk is really great. What we do is we create this aesthetic that looks really cool. It looks like a Studio Ghibli cartoon or whatever, and it's like got all this cool plants and stuff, and then we force that aesthetic into reality. Well, we're going into Sorel Town when we do that. That's idealism. It is mythology based. It's aesthetic guided. It's radical subjectivism, and it's dangerous because what is there in solar punk that is inherently anti-fascist? I don't see much because it's not material based. It's not class based. It's vibes based. And that's a very controversial opinion.
Cool.
It makes people mad because a lot of the solar punk art is really cool, and it it looks cool, and it makes people feel good, and they're very defensive.
It's all vibes. It's just it.
Now, I'm not saying you should never engage in solar punk art or that there aren't ways to develop solar punk aesthetics to actually be rooted in class or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying as it exists today, I have a strong critique of it. All right. Sorry, I'm not reading the chat a lot today because I'm just trying to get through so much shit. So I apologize if I've missed any cool chats from anybody. Oh, we did just get a donation from McClubbin. McClubbin, thank you so much. Says catching up from last week's Mooncast. Also have a great week, comrades. Great videos breaking this stuff down. Thank you so much. And we actually caught this one kind of quick this time. Only 2 minutes. Usually
2 minutes.
Poor McClubbin usually has to wait like 30 minutes for us to catch the donut. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. All right, going back to the article. To probe the issue, we need to consider how Sorel's anarchist theory of anti-statism, constructed around the power of myths, led him to endorse anti-capitalist anti-Semitism as an extension of his theory of class struggle and his Janus-based concept of violence as it relates to the quest for moral regeneration. That's very, very important to understand as we move forward, okay? Sorel was a prolific author whose tumultuous political evolution accounts for the fact that following his death, activists across the full political spectrum laid claim to his philosophical legacy. Sounds like Hegel. Kind of like a 20th century Hegel. Born in Cherbourg as the son of a bankrupt wine merchant, Sorel received technical training at the École Polytechnique in Paris before becoming an engineer in 1870. From 1879 to his retirement in 92, Sorel was ensconced in Perpignan in the Eastern Pyrenees. And it was there in 1889. I am not good at pronouncing French. He published his first books, Le Procès de Socrate and the Contribution à l'étude profonde de la Bible.
Bible? La Bible?
La Bible. These texts laid the groundwork for the sociology of morals that became the central preoccupation of all his later writing. After his retirement, he moved to Paris, where he first embraced orthodox Marxism before embarking on a revisionist interpretation of Marx that would culminate in his conversion to revolutionary syndicalism. So he started as a Marxist. Again, as I was saying earlier, he believed there was a crisis of Marxism, and he tried to rebuild a new ideology, which he called syndicalism. Between 93 and 97, Sorel contributed to the ephemeral journal L'Heure Nouvelle and to the more successful Devenir Social. Concurrently, he continued. I don't think we need to read all this. I mean, he wrote a bunch of shit.
Yeah.
It's not really talking about his ideas. After 1902, Sorel parted ways with parliamentary socialism altogether, claiming that the true legacy of Marx resided in the agitational, direct action politics of the French syndicats and their Bourse du Travail, a meeting hall, cultural center, and labor exchange, which guaranteed their class autonomy. So there are ideas in Sorel that I find interesting and not bad, right? So one of them is this idea that having a strong union
as a power check.
Is a power check against a party or a government or whatever. Even if you have like a communist government, like you should still have a strong union. I think that idea in and of itself has merit. Like, yeah, we always want to have strong unions that are actually controlled by workers. I think that's important. I think that, it is important that actual workers control the unions. That's a good point, Sorel. Okay. You took it too far, though. You took it to...
You can just stop there.
Yeah, you took it too far.
Things might have been better.
Okay. So anyway, during this time, he became enamored with the anti-rationalist philosopher Henry Bergson and regularly attended the lectures of the Collège de France. Subsequently, he adapted Bergson's critique of scientific determinism and his alternative theory of creative intuition to his own radical revision of Marxism. So we basically see this anti-scientific, anti-rational, pro-intuition, pro-creativity, pro-vibes formation of ideas. Bergsonian thought, in conjunction with that of Vico, inspired Sorel's interpretation of the syndicist general strike as a myth that would awaken the intuitive capacity of the proletariat and spark their ethical war against a decadent Third Republic. So the idea is that, humanity has always been guided by mythology, and the working class needs a mythology to guide it. And so he thought that the general strike would serve this role. And that if we had a bunch of general strikes, then everyone would get really inspired and they would vibe their way to revolution.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm being a little bit glib here, but I do think that's basically what he's trying to say. So, all right. Sorel outlined his new theory in 3 interrelated books, all published in 1908. The Decomposition of Marxism, which extricated Marxism from political reformism. The Illusions of Progress, a critique of the Enlightenment and its legacy and the culture and politics of the bourgeoisie. And Reflections on Violence, his Bergsonian Apologia of Proletarian Violence, which outlined the theory of myth and revolution. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of call this the end for now. We're going to have to pick this up next stream or in a future stream. But if you want to read this again, it's called, if you want to read this on your own, it's called Bad Anarchism, Aesthetized Myth-Making and the Legacy of Georges Sorel by Mark
There's a
Anna.
question for you, for us. What are unions in the route to communism?
Well, we could talk about, here's what we should talk about, Luna, I think, because I've been studying this a little bit lately, and I know you probably know more about it than I do, for sure. Let's talk about the role unions played in the Vietnamese Revolution.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me that, and the answer is union played the core important role of our revolution.
Why don't you get us up to, because I know a little bit about the 40s and like how they turned into a military, but why don't you talk about like the formation of the unions in Vietnam and how that led to...
Okay, so I'll give you a brief history lesson about Vietnam and then the worker history in Vietnam. So in the 19th century, Vietnam was technically a feudalist system. So we had peasants and serfs and farmers and nobles, right? So there was virtually no workers and they didn't have a real industry. But then in 1857-58, when the French came and colonized Vietnam, they turned our country into a colony. And into early 20th centuries, about 1900, they brought industry in Vietnam by they came to Vietnam, they built their mansions, they built factories, they built plantations, they built railroads, and they forced Vietnamese farmers and peasants and the serfs to work in their factories. The factories are owned by the French. Okay. And at that time, like literally Vietnam were enslaved by the French colonialists. So by 1920s, there were a lot of Vietnamese people, as I said, who were forced to become workers because that was the only way for them to make a little bit of money to earn for living. And at that time, Ho Chi Minh, he was with his group of communists in France, learning about communism, and then they brought communism, Leninism, Marxism to Vietnam at that time, and trying to educate Vietnamese workers about class consciousness. And right after that, about 1929, workers in a Bason factory in the south of Vietnam.
Basson?
His name is Bason.
The name of the company.
The name of the factory is Bason. It's Bason.
Okay.
A few hundreds of them formed together into what counted as the very first workers' union in Vietnam. We called it the Red Union. The Red Union. And that was formed because they were all like Marxists and Leninists and communists, and they were directly educated by Ho Chi Minh and the first groups of Vietnamese communists who came back from France in that time. So yes, the very first Red Union, and from that is red receptor. So for like nearly after a few in the 1930s, we're trying to start workers' union in every single factory all over Vietnam, and that was when in the 1930s we formed the first. We formed the Indochina Communist Party. That the majority of the members of Indochina Communist Party was workers' union, and from just like started a few hundreds and a few thousand, and all the way until 1940s, we have tens of thousands of workers who are in unions, and they form Communist Party of Vietnam, the Workers' Party. But first we called the Labor Party. It was not the Communist Party of Vietnam yet. It was the Labor's Party. Yes, and yeah, it was that. Literally, the history of the Communist Party of Vietnam is a history of workers' union.
Right.
And then the president, the chairman of the very first Red Union in Vietnam, 1929, became the president of Vietnam after Ho Chi Minh died, 1969.
Now, the other thing to understand is that in the 1940s, the unions were the seed for the revolutionary armed uprising.
Exactly, because it was because of the workers' union that the workers were trained, were educated in theory, and they were trained in practice too, and how they organize and get together.
So when we were in the B-52 Museum in Hanoi, there was a cool little display that was talking about the unions and how they were the first militias that fought against the fascist Japanese and then the French, and then basically formed into the They were like, a lot of them became Viet Minh, etc. And they had uniforms, and they had they would have like drills and exercises and stuff like that. And they had a hat that was one of the, every factory would have its own uniform, but I made my own because I thought it was so cool. So I found a hat that looked kind of like the hats that they had for their little union uniforms. So I made this hat by just taking a Vietnam militia emblem and putting it on this just kind of fiddler Lenin cap that I found. But anyway, they did wear uniforms, that sort of thing, and they stole weapons from the Japanese fascists, and they were very pivotal in the armed uprising against fascism in Japan.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to talk about is I have a series on a union that I think did a lot of things really, really well in the 1910s, and they're coming back today. It's called the IWW. I'm a member.
Industrial Workers of the World.
Yeah, but they also made some errors, I think, in the 1910s that we can talk about real quick here, because there's a way that you can go, there's Sorrell's way of going too far with over-essentializing unions, but also I think the IWW made some mistakes with over-essentializing the role of unions, and I'll share a link to part 1 of the 2-part documentary series we made on this. So in the 1910s, the IWW was doing an amazing job. They're called the Industrial Workers of the World, aka the Wobblies. Here's the document. I'm just going to put it in the chat. Fighting racism in the USA. Mm-hmm. And their whole idea was we just form one big union, and we let everybody in, black, white, whatever, which is a very radical idea at the time. Because the white unions back then didn't want to accept black members, and they considered black people scabs and all kinds of stuff like that. There were all kinds of racist problems with the union movement at the time. And their whole idea was, no, we're going to let everybody in. But one of the problems that they had was that they thought that the union and the general strike was the only. It's kind of similar, and I'm sure Sorrell influenced this some, but I haven't really researched that yet, so I'm not going to say that with any. That's just a educated guess right now. But regardless, it is similar to Sorrell's idea that the general strike is like the only way forward. And so they would have black folks that they were talking to, and they did have a lot of black members and leaders and stuff in the organization, but they were telling them like the only way for you to struggle is through striking and labor, organized labor, and like not to. They basically were discouraging any other kind of praxis, basically. And it ended up being a big limiting factor. And I think it ended up, they could have probably been a lot more successful if they were a little bit less dogmatic about that. But, that's a complicated thing. You can watch the whole documentary if you want to see the story for yourself and draw your own conclusions. They did start to kind of distance themselves from socialist parties. They did say that because I think before the American Communist, the CPUSA was founded, there was the big one was called the Socialist Party. And if you read the newspapers at the time, you start to see them making a lot of pot shots at the Socialist Party and basically discouraging people from party politics and telling them that you should only be involved with unionized.
I think the biggest issue that I have with them is that at that time they were not, radical enough in a sense that they still seek to work within the scope of capitalism.
Well, let me yes and that. Because I think that the IWW was very, at that time in the 1910s and into the 20s, I do think the IWW was very committed to overthrowing the wage system of capitalism.
Yeah.
There was the AFL-CIO at the time that was not, they did not want to overthrow capitalism, and they just wanted to basically improve conditions for the workers within whatever union existed. But basically because the IWW lost the power struggle with the AFL-CIO, they faded into almost obscurity by the 1920s, whereas the AFL-CIO took over the whole USA. And so that kind of bourgeois trade unionism is to this day the strongest current in the USA. And the IWW is just barely starting to make a comeback. I hope it does continue to make a comeback because I do think it's Contemporary Formation is a good organization. I encourage you to look into it. But
it's a good, step to a further step, There's a Kelly Chingo, it seems that in Vietnam, it seems easy to build a union. Yes, it is easy to build it if you have a class conscience. You have a better class conscience.
Well, not only that, but you have it's embedded in the law that if you have, 4 workers?
Well, more than 5 workers in a factory that want to form a union, there must be a union.
There has to be a union, yeah.
And the company, after, establishing the company, within 6 months, they will have to have a workers' union.
Right. So, anyway. That's it. We're out of time now. We don't really have a clean way to end this one, but we will talk about this more next week. I think it's really important. The documentary based on Perenti's work is going to drop hopefully this week, by this weekend, we hope. There's still a lot of editing work to do on it, but I'm
I didn't know this.
What?
The better thing about union in India, we are having 2 strikes right now. The farmers' union strike and the wrestlers' union strike. And now they both, stand together in solidarity.
What? There's a wrestlers' union strike? That's awesome. You know that the wrestlers, I hope you meant wrestlers, right? You mean wrestlers?
Because in wrestling?
In that Vince Vaughn, I think is his name, who is the head of the big wrestling federation in the USA. I don't remember the names of all these things. I'm not a huge wrestling nerd. But I know that he specifically was able to basically break down the union making attempts because first, I'm going to get this order fucked up, but it was something along the lines of first they wanted to go into an athletes union. And Vince Vaughn was like, no, these aren't really athletes. They're actors. And he basically soured that. And then they tried to get into the actors union. He's like, no, they're not really actors. Vince McMahon, not Vince Vaughn.
Vince what?
Vince Vaughn's a comedy actor. God damn it. This is what I get when I start talking about things I don't really understand.
Sure.
Vince McMahon. I don't know that many Vinces. I got my cousin Vinny. That's about it. Okay, anyway. But anyway, he was a big union buster, Vince McMahon, not necessarily Vince Vaughn. I don't know Vince Vaughn's relationship to the working class, but Vince Vaughn. That's funny. All right. So thanks for watching. Keep an eye out at youtube.com/noncompete if you're not already subscribed. If you happen to be watching on Luna's channel, the documentary will drop soon. Just keep being rad.
I'm hungry.
Luna's hungry, so it's time to go eat. So thanks for watching. We'll see you soon. Anything else to add? You want to sing a song?
Việt Nam, Việt Nam, Việt Nam, ôi đất Việt yêu dấu ngàn năm. Việt Nam, Việt Nam, muôn năm. That's a Fascist song.
Oh yeah, you gotta sing the chorus.
Give me the lyrics.
Oh my God, never mind. How do you not know the lyrics to Death to Fascist? Good night, everybody.
Vai cái vai không phân ra diện trai hay gái tiến bước lên ta đi lên ta tiến lên ta diệt quân thù Việt Nam Việt Nam yeah
Yeah, bye.